Hello, and welcome back to the Elevate Your Running podcast. This is Coach Sara, and I'm here with Coach Amber today. Hey, Coach Amber, how's it going?
Good, Sarah. Having a good week so far?
Yeah, it's been, we were talking offline, a little busy, but also a lot of fun. And just got off a series of coaching calls with athletes, which is always a really fun afternoon of connecting. And it's always good to see their faces and hear a bit more about what's going on in their personal life and where they're traveling to and different things like that. So it's been a good week. How is it going for you?
The sun, though, that we're having in Colorado is nice, right? We were in like a deep freeze for a while, I feel like.
Yeah, like much of the country in such a deep freeze, and we're back into some lovely weather and it feels good. It's kind of that season of running where I feel like I don't know exactly what to wear on a run because like I overdressed on Tuesday and then today I was like, I think I slightly overdressed, not as bad as Tuesday's run, but still pretty warm.
Yeah, you start out a little bit cold and then you get sweaty pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yep. And in Colorado too, we are lucky because in the summertime even it's pretty easy, we get pretty nice weather in the mornings where we can run and it's not too hot yet and then it heats up. So we have some big spans of temperatures from morning till late afternoon. But right now the sun just brings so much warmth. So even if it's like it still feels really warm when you get that big sunshine, which is so nice.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think I'll get outside again before the sun sets, but I know it'll be back tomorrow, which is going to be great.
Yep.
Yeah, well, today's episode is going to be really fun. We're going to talk about negative splitting and how to master the art of a progression run. So these are going to be one and the same, but also different sort of aspects to your training. And I'm such a big believer in progression running, progression tempos, progression long runs, practicing this skill, which I believe is a skill. And it's part of, I think, like a pacing skill and just having that part of your, runner toolbox and what you want to pull out and when. And then, of course, the negative split secrets. Like, how do you negative split a workout? How do you negative split a race, which is very difficult to do, but there are ways to do it. So, we're going to talk all about that today.
And I think too, something to keep in mind is that negative splitting is great and that's what we're looking for, but that doesn't mean that you just go as slow as possible the first portion so that you can definitely go faster the second portion.
I
You
think
want
they
to
call that sandbagging.
Yeah, I was going to say something else, but then I was like, this is a family-friendly podcast, so maybe I shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't cuss. But yeah, you want to find that really good balance. You want to make sure that you're pushing the right effort the first portion, and then when you do kick it into a higher gear or faster gear, that it's the right effort there too, because anyone can negative split if they go slow enough in the beginning, if they stand back.
I mean, that is a great way to kick off this episode. Like sandbagging the progression run or the negative split will absolutely ensure that you do something pretty incredible in that second half. And like it is like this balancing act. And I think it's like such a great it's a segue to, I think it was our last episode that we recorded together and we talked about those pacing gears and having all those gears that you can use in the duration of training and racing. And this is kind of a nice, like, next level conversation about how to set up a progression run, how to negative split. So it's a true hard effort and you kind of give it your all and you're able to do it all. So it's going to be a lot
Mhm.
of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk quickly about like what is a progression run and your definition as a coach?
Yeah, so progression runs I give my athletes quite often, especially in lieu of just a straight up tempo run. So, you might have a day that's more dedicated towards tempo miles, and your coach might say you're going to be running these tempo miles at 10K effort or half marathon effort. A twist that I like to give from time to time is to make it into a progression tempo. And so, you could say you're going to be running 6 miles at half marathon effort or between half marathon effort and marathon effort. But I want you to do these as a progression. So say you were aiming for, a 9-minute mile. Then for your ideal average, then you would go start out at perhaps a 9:20, drop down to a 9, then or a 9:10, then a 9, then a 8:50, then 8:40, something like that. If you're doing 5 miles, if you do 6, and you can just add on a little to the top, a little bit to the bottom. I like 10 seconds per mile. That's kind of my go-to, but
Mhm.
sometimes I do a little bit more in between. But you can do that with progression runs that are like 6 miles. You can do it all the way down to 400s. Like you can even run 14 400s and have your last four faster than the rest, which would be progressing. You could progress on all of them and have your first split the or your first segment the slowest, and then kind of like build as you go. But a lot of times when I do speed work with my athletes, I like them to finish strong and give it their all, at least the last two efforts. So that, in a sense, is also a progression or negative splitting. So lots of different ways that you can do it. I think in a podcast that we did a while back when we were talking about some fun themed workouts, I
Holiday
told you,
workouts.
yeah, I told you about one where I used to do back in the olden days with my team, and we would do 30 minutes out and back, and your 30 minutes out was a hard effort, but your 30 minutes back had to be faster because you had to pass your sock. These were the
Yeah.
CrossFit games, I
The
think it was.
stalking.
So that's definitely, a progression too, because your first 30 minutes was slower than your last 30 minutes, you're negative splitting. So it can mean different things depending on the type of workout, but basically you're getting a little bit faster as you go and finishing strong.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the definition of a progression run. And there's so many creative things that you can do with this style of running, which is so fun. Like Amber, you mentioned, like in lieu of a tempo, like a straight up tempo, you might do a progression tempo. I love a good progression long run. And sometimes I'll let the athlete decide. It's like runner's choice. You decide how you want to progress. And to me, that always kind of gives, kind of based on their feedback and their notes, a good insight as to how they run, how they progress. Can they do it? Because it is a skill set. And there are going to be, if you're not on a flat course or a track, like there could be some elevation areas that impact your progression and your negative split and progressing and getting faster with each mile. I think if you're looking at it in a broad in a way of like, yeah, every 10 seconds you can just naturally like click down, I think that is a really fun way to do it. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes I'll get an athlete who will like, yeah, click off 10, 10, 10, and then maybe it's like 7 and then 3 and then maybe another big burst of 10 at the end or something like that. But it can be a lot of fun, and it should feel, what I love about the progression is that you can kind of feel the effort get faster, get harder. You feel your feet and your body work a little bit harder. And that is the same and true in, hopefully racing. You start out a little bit slower in racing. You gradually pick up depending on the race distance. If it's a half marathon, you might progress all the way down through the end, like I did in my Indianapolis half, which is a little over a year ago. Still my PR to date, breakthrough half. But in the marathon, that's actually quite hard to do. So it might be this progression up to a certain point, and then you're holding, or maybe you're backtracking a little bit on that pace. But it can be something that you practice in training, and obviously, if you practice it in training, you can also deliver that on race day. Progression runs are awesome in training. They're there for new athletes, for advanced athletes. They can be structured in a lot of different ways, whether they're in a tempo or if it's a progression long run. It can be a section of a progression long run. Like a lot of my group training athletes right now, I think this weekend, when this episode airs, it's going to be last weekend, they have like a slight progression in their long run. And it's just warm up, progression, cool down, and they get to kind of decide what that progression looks like. So it's a lot of fun. And so there's a lot of different ways that it can be structured, which I think always allows more confidence to come into the training, which is a big piece to coaching and setting the athlete up for success.
Yeah, one I was just remembering too that I like to give my athletes is if they're training for a marathon, one of the 20 milers, I like
Yeah.
them to go nice and easy for the first 10 miles. And then, no matter what pace you're running 10 miles at, your legs are going to be fatigued. And
Yeah.
so they go nice and easy for the first 10 and then pick it up the last 10. And that's a killer. That's a good
In the
one.
best way.
In the best way. That one, even though it's not like they're ready, like their goal marathon pace the whole time through, they really can get a good sense for when I'm starting to fatigue, I've already gone this far, picking it up, what does that feel like? And it's a good confidence booster when they're done. They just sometimes hate it during.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't feel fun. Sometimes it doesn't feel easy, but hopefully afterwards you feel like a sense of accomplishment. You have those endorphins. You know that training run is a deposit in your training bank, and you're able to cash in on race day. That's kind of always, the goal. If we're going after a specific outcome goal in a race. Yeah. So negative split is going to be a little bit different than progression. A negative split run is going to be running the second half of the run faster than you ran the first half of the run. So can you negative split in a progression run? You can. And a negative split is also its own unique style of racing and training. And, negative splits are generally considered the cream of the crop for racing. Like if you negative split a marathon, you're in good shape. Like you just had a unicorn race. If you're not, of course, sandbagging that first half of the race. But if you're starting the first half, let's say of a marathon, and you come through the first half, let's say let's say you have a unicorn day, you're going for a sub 4 hour marathon, you come through the half at let's say like 2:01. So that's 2 hours, 1 minute, and then you run the second half of that marathon in 1:57. That would be considered a negative split. So the first half was slower than the second half. It's usually not a wide spread between the two. It's usually pretty close, or it could be something like a 2:01 and a 1:58, just enough to get over that sub 4 hour goal, and you just slightly get faster. And so you're really working, a pretty even split race when it's that close.
Yeah. And I think that it really helps if you have a good negative split goal. It really helps you from bonking that first half. I think that's where a lot of people run into problems is they go out too fast, especially, I mean, really with any size race, but with the marathon, the half marathon, you go out too fast and you're going to pay for it later. And so, really having a good intentional plan of negative splitting can prevent that. Like, what paces you can run and you need to hold back a little bit that first half. It can really ensure a better ending where you're not doing the death march to the end.
I know. No one wants the death march. And you are rolling the dice a little bit if you're like, oh, I'm going to negative split this race, because it is a really hard thing to do. And it's something that, it takes a lot of time, I think, practicing and training. You practice it in racing. And then you have one of those days where it just comes together and it all works out. But it also takes practice. And one thing that comes to mind is when I did run a progression negative, I guess it was also a negative split half in Indy, is I had worked in training on these cut downs, and these cut downs had started at half marathon effort, and then they cut down to 10K effort, they cut down to 5K effort, and that's literally what happened in the race. And I hung on to and ran half marathon effort for the first half. I started to get a little bit faster after the halfway mark, and then at mile 9, I asked myself, like, what can you do in the next X number of minutes? And I think that that's a really cool way to kind of look at racing too, is like, if you're 4 miles out, bring it back to minutes versus miles. And sometimes the mind actually accepts that in an easier way than, especially in a marathon, like miles. And I asked myself, I'm like, what can you do in gosh, like 26, 27 minutes, like go do that, whatever you can do. And so I just went, and each mile I just got faster and faster and faster. And I dropped down to like what ended up being about my last mile ended up being about 15 seconds faster than my overall average. And that is something that I felt like, wow, I did this in training a few times. I had these big tempo runs and we were progressing and we were cutting down, and it just showed up in training that day. And I think that that's really cool too, when you can have something like a progression, a negative split, and then you tie it back to the work that you put in either in that training cycle or in, previous training cycles.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a testament to your, mental toughness, but also the practice that you had because your body just knew what to do. Like it had trained enough and knew how to pick it up in the end like that. And
Yeah.
so everything was there and it all came together, which is
Yeah.
awesome when that works out.
I know, it's so awesome, and it doesn't happen every time,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I think the biggest piece to it when I dissect it is like the first 5K was slow. It was slower than the target pace. The goal was to run sub 90, which is a 650 average. And my first 5K came in at like 655, 656. So it was a little bit slower. And then I cut into goal pace, and then I just continued to cut. And I
Hmm.
think, in last week's episode, I talked about the most common half marathon mistakes. And that is one of them, of like the opposite of what I did, is like starting up too fast, which I've been there too. You start out way too hot, and then kind of blow up and learn a lesson the hard way in the race. But let's get to, I'd love to talk about benefits of both the progression runs and the negative split kind of running. The progression runs are so great because they do improve your aerobic capacity. And that's really what we're looking for as coaches. We really want to have that aerobic foundation. We want to build that best battery or that best engine as much as possible. But it also enhances your lactate threshold, which I think is also really important, because the higher we can get that lactate threshold ceiling, the higher we can get it, the higher we can move up your marathon ceiling, your half marathon ceiling, your 10K ceiling. It all connects together. And so if we can enhance your lactate threshold by these progression runs, it's going to help tenfold throughout the rest of your training, which I think is one of the cool aspects to having it in your training, whether you're a new runner who needs to learn and gets to learn how to pace and what different paces feel like. Or if you're an advanced runner and you're also looking for a different way to enhance your lactate threshold, and that could be outside of lactate threshold specific workouts, progression runs can do that, which make it really fun.
And I feel like for me, the things that I love most about him are being confidence boosters. Like the more times you run progression runs, negative splits, then when you get into the race, you're like we talked about with your indie race, you just know what to do. Your body has done it before and it becomes second nature, but you have to really practice in order to get to that point where you feel confident doing it. I remember I did 5 full marathons before I figured it out. Like literally every time I'd get to the start line and be like, I know I'm supposed to go at this pace, but I feel so good today. Like it was this, like you just get this adrenaline rush and you just feel like today's going to be the day where I just blow my goal away because I feel so good. And so you go out too hot and you bonk, and it like 5 times to be like, you're an idiot. Stop making that same mistake. You're going to feel that adrenaline rush. You're going to feel that energy right when you start every time, and you have to hold back. So it's a confidence booster when you do these in training. And then also energy management. Your body just learns how to conserve and how to kick it into the higher gear when you need to, rather than utilizing all of the energy prior and then not having anything left at the end. So energy management, confidence booster. Those are definitely some advantages of doing these in training.
Yeah, and it's going to teach pacing as well. And I think it goes back to what you said about, going into a race and feeling confident about your pacing strategy. Like I've practiced progression so many times, and I've had coached athletes through a lot of progression runs that it builds that confidence, and they know their body just knows how to go there, which is really fun. If it's like an A or B day, if it's lower than a B day, it might not be there, but that's like a totally different thing. But it does kind of teach you that art of pacing. I think it's also really cool that like with a progression run in training, it's going to also help shift your mindset into like, okay, we warm up and then we get into the run. And it gives you that sense of like a really hearty warm up. Like I always give athletes, like, if it's a long run, I usually give them at least 4 miles before they start to tick down. If it's a workout, I usually give a range of 2 to 3 miles, depending on that athlete and how much time they have. They always get kind of a cool down range too, also depending on how much time they have. And I think that that sets them up to have a little bit of autonomy within that workout, but it also sets them up to have that warm up before going into that effort. It's not a full hard effort, but it is harder than warm up. So it can prevent, it could be that warm up before is like a good injury prevention as that athlete goes into, a multiple mile or several minutes of a progression.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
cuz they can be set up so differently, which is so fun. Like I have some athletes like your speed limit is half marathon today. Your speed limit is 10K. Your speed limit is marathon, like whatever it is. And that can be just really fun to play around with.
Yeah, it all depends on the person, what their goals are, how long they've been running, what the speeds are that they're running. There's just so many things you have to take into consideration.
You mean it depends,
Yeah,
Amber?
I mean that it has to, yeah. There's a lot of information that we as coaches take into account when prescribing these types of runs. So, yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes people, when they're first into running, they hear all these phrases and they're like, "Oh, I want to do this or I want to do that." And it's like,
Yeah.
you'll get there. But right now, it looks very different when you're just starting out to when you're an advanced runner for sure.
Absolutely. I remember last summer I had an athlete with a progression run, and, we were working on pacing. I was working on giving her like a lighter long run that wasn't easy, but it definitely didn't have like all this quality in it that she had been running. And she's like, "So what paces do you want me to run?" And I'm like, "Whatever you want to run. I want this to be, effort based." And for me, it was like I really wanted to see a lot of things kind of behind the curtains on this run. I wanted to see how her pacing was. I actually wanted to see if she was going to ask me about the pacing because she was so detailed on needing to know exactly what to do. I wanted to kind of pull that away a bit because I think there is something really cool that can happen in training when an athlete says, "Oh, okay, I have autonomy today. I get to do what I want to do to a certain extent. How do I want to progress this? How do I want it to feel? How do I want it to go?" Listen to my body, which is ultimately the biggest win versus, a coach saying exactly what specific pace to run. And it can teach that athlete so many things beyond just the run, which is really cool. But yeah, there's just so many different ways to structure it, to plan it, to create it for each person. And it gives so much back to the athlete and, of course, the coach.
And I would say too, like if your coach isn't prescribing progression runs and you're like, hey, I want to do that, it could be for a couple other reasons too. Like I have some athletes who are training for races where a progression run might not be in their best interest. Like sometimes
Yeah.
some of them are doing rebel races, right? Where it's usually like a
Yeah.
huge drop
The
for the
opposite.
first half, and then the second half is like flat. So it's like
Yeah.
are you really not going to take advantage of the huge drop portion and you're going to go slow there and then try to speed up on the flat portion? Like that doesn't make sense. So I think if you do have a big race goal, you need to make sure that you're really looking at what that course looks like, what the vert looks like mile to mile, and trying to replicate that in training runs. You might even have like a middle section where you have a series of like ups and downs. And then if you do, then that's great in training to also try to replicate in long runs, a middle section where you have some ups and downs. So you're not going to always have perfect progressions, but if it's a flat course, like Indy is perfect, right? Indy would be a perfect course for a progression run. And a lot of other courses are like that too. But there might be some courses that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point that like progression runs don't make sense for certain athletes in certain parts of their training, unless the coach is saying, ooh, I do want them to have this skill set to have in like the long-term approach. So this is why we're doing this progression run now, but it doesn't have anything to do with your race.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anything, it's yeah, like you said, it's the exact opposite. Like Revel races, they're run so well. They have this incredible timing technology now where you can track runners, I think, like basically every point one on the rate on the course versus like, every like 5K and then it's delayed and then you miss your person and all this stuff. So they have like those races are set up extremely well. They have great technology. They're fast courses for some athletes. And some athletes really struggle on those courses because it is that significant downhill to then maybe less downhill or flat, like you mentioned, Amber. And if you're running downhill like significantly, like 100 to 250 feet of elevation loss per mile,
Or
maybe
forfeit.
yeah, or 450. Right. I know you've done them. I haven't. We should do a podcast on revels. That when you transition to that flatter section on the course, it actually feels like you're running uphill. And so you
Hmm.
have to practice that quite a bit, which is very, very different from a progression or negative splits sort of situation. So I think it's good to understand like what type of race you're running, what type of training you're getting into, what are the skill sets you need to learn to be able to grow within like the whole learning space, and then make a priority list or your coach makes a priority list on what makes sense for this cycle versus kind of that long-term approach. Yeah. I feel like we should talk about benefits of negative splits, which are very similar to the progression runs. Like, you do want to conserve your energy in the early stages of the race to get that negative split, but it can be such a close negative split that you're running almost even splits. So that conserving of the energy might not feel as massive as maybe what it felt like for me in that Indianapolis half, where I'm like, whoa, this first 5K feels like such a jog. Now I need to start ticking down, even though the goal was to average pretty close. The B goal was to average pretty close to that average for the sub 90. So, conserving energy in the early stages of a race, identifying what that feels like, understanding what that feels like, I think is really important because how many times have we gone into a race and we're like, I feel so good. I'm totally conserving energy. And then you like bonk halfway through because like you just hit the wall. I think that's so true. But if you're like truly conserving energy, it should feel like so easy. It should feel so, so, so easy. Um,
And I think
and then,
when you're practicing in training, one thing that you
yeah,
can really also work on is perceived effort
yeah.
versus actual effort.
Yeah.
Because I think the more often you do these types of runs, the more you're able to really identify if your body's seriously in pain or if it's just pushing harder than it was,
Yeah.
and like really filling out those different gears. Because oftentimes I have athletes who get really nervous about specific workouts, and I think progressions are one of them because also ladders are one of them because you have to go up and then come back down, right? And so oftentimes they get nervous thinking, but what if I don't have enough energy at the end? Or what if I'm not strong enough at the end? And so they start
Yeah.
overthinking. And I think that can play into the perceived effort because they think, oh no, if I drop 10 seconds this next mile, it's going to feel so hard and I'm going to be so tired and it's going to hurt so bad. But in all reality, if you can really hone in on your body cues, how your calves are feeling, how your legs are feeling, how your quads are feeling, how your back's feeling. Is your form good? If you can really focus on your body and not push all those things out of your mind of the fears of how it could feel and really just hone in on how your body is feeling, I think it can really benefit you. But the more you practice, the better it's going to be for race day too.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that so much because there's so much goodness there. And like part of me as a coach wants athletes to just throw the watch away, but we as coaches need the watch to see the data. But like it would be so cool if there was a way to capture the data without like the athlete knowing what they were doing because they can get, and I fall into this trap too, like you get so caught up into everything that you're looking at on your watch that you like almost you almost set yourself up for failure in that way of like you get so anxious or you're just always looking at your watch, you're not feeling your body or the body cues. And really at Indy, like glanced at my watch, but I was running a lot on effort. And I remember seeing a lot of 640, a lot of 641s. And I'm like, this feels so good. Just keep going. And when it still feels good in that last 5K of a race, then you know you just have to go because you should have enough energy to be able to produce something really special in that moment. But listening to your body, the effort is so massive. And maybe it takes, if you're someone who isn't working with a coach, or even if you are, like maybe it takes jumping into races and just not looking at your watch and really learning what those efforts feel like, what the body cues are telling you. Or you can also notice that, of course, in workouts and in training runs. But something I've been doing lately is with a lot of athletes racing, I'm giving them a lot of effort based race strategies, which part coach in me is cringing because I feel like I owe them paces. And the other part of me is like loving it because they're thriving and running PRs. So, like, it feels good when they can execute it, right? But it takes the right athlete for sure. It takes practice.
Yeah, and I think both can go hand in hand, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're at this effort base on an ideal day, it would be around this pace, right? But if that effort is feeling totally different this day, that's, sometimes if you
It's
let
the
it go,
day.
your effort can be way faster than you ever knew, right? That you could
Yeah.
run. Like, so sometimes you got to be able to let it go. One thing too,
For
I don't know if you've ever like read any Eckhart Tolle books. Have you, Sarah?
Yeah. Uh huh. I
You
have.
have? Okay, I was gonna say some people think that's like, woo woo weirdo
No,
stuff.
I'm all into that.
But I was thinking about this isn't specific to progression runs or negative splits, but it does tie in. And that
Yeah.
is I was listening to his audiobook of The Power of Now like a year ago or something, and I was on a run and I was like really focusing on the now, like right now, like this foot in front of this foot, and then this step, taking this step, like not even like the now, like today or this hour, but like each footstep. And I
Yeah.
was so surprised at how easy the run felt because I
Yeah.
wasn't projecting like miles down the road of how it was going to feel, or when I had to pick it up, or when I had to, like do my next surge or whatever. I wasn't thinking about anything in the future. I was just thinking about what I'm doing right now. And when I was able to really do that, which didn't last very long because you have to really practice, but when I was really, really honed in, like it felt easy. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I could just tap into this and really like work on my brain power, this could be like a game changer, which of course, then I got on to my next audiobook and kind of forgot about it. But I just remembered that now. And I was like, oh my gosh, like there's so much power in just focusing on right now and not focusing on what the fear of what could be or the pain that could come. And you can take that with you too with with negative splitting, just like being positive and about what's going to come, and then also just being in the now.
100%. The positive mindset is going to be a game changer, especially when you're on the line and you're telling yourself, yes, I can. Yes, I can do this, whatever that is. If it's a progression, a negative split, a PR, a strong effort, you don't blow up. I've run a marathon before where like the sole goal from my coach was like, do not blow up in the last 10K. That is your goal. So whatever you have to do that, do that. Like, I'll see you at the finish line. And it ended up being one of my fastest marathons until this last fall, which is pretty wild when you think of it, because you're just thinking and focusing on something maybe a little bit different than what we typically focus on. And I absolutely love that point, Amber. The Elevate team has worked with a few different mental strength coaches, and one of them is a sports psychologist in Denver, Dr. Ross, and he has talked to our team about how when you are kind of getting caught up in racing and you're starting to feel that anxiety and that unsure, the doubt starts to creep in, to take a moment and really like center in on yourself and start like noticing and hearing your footsteps, saying you're not like listening to music or something like that. You're hearing your breath. You're noticing how your body feels. You're trying to relax your body. So you're so inward and focused on you and your running form that you forget about what you're running or what you're doing. Typically, that athlete is going to perform better than the athlete that has like all these thoughts going on in their mind, or they're feeling anxious, or they're judging themselves for being whoever they are in that moment. And it's really powerful. So I'm a big believer in it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. Yeah. So that can be a huge benefit to negative splitting, is listening to the audiobook. But like, yeah, while running. But like, yeah, staying focused, and something like that doesn't have to be for the entire duration of the run, right? Like Amber, you said you focused on it for a few minutes and then, life happened, and I think it's very easy for our brains to start going off in 80,000 other directions. But I think if you are an athlete that wants to start practicing that, you can go inward, for a few minutes, and then of course that outward, which is like looking at the trees, looking at the birds, hearing the birds, looking at the sky, obviously your surroundings around you too, but taking it off the effort, or taking it off of the pace or off of the watch just for a few minutes, and just notice and see what happens. See if you're running happier or more relaxed or stronger or faster. I mean, who knows what can show up?
Agreed.
Yeah. I think what's also really fun about progression and negative split racing is, let me back up. I'm a big believer that running, training, and racing is a you versus you thing. The
Agreed.
comparison game, no bueno, not part of this coaching practice. I know, Amber, you're a big believer in that too. It's like, you show up to the line, you are trying to do something good for you, whatever that is. If it's a process goal, a performance goal, or performance standard goal, or an outcome goal, could be a mixture of all those things. But there is something to be said about passing people in a race. And if you're passing people at the end of the race, it doesn't really matter, I think, how bad you feel. You don't really notice it, and you're just picking up on like that you're passing people who are probably in bad shape. I specifically remember I passed a female at Indy. It was right after mile 9. She had a pacer with her, and she was breathing so heavy, and she was just like, this is not my day. And I remember thinking like, I'm so glad I don't feel like that. And I also just feel really bad for her right now, because 4 miles is a long way to go when you're just like kind of overcooked at that point.
Hopefully you didn't say something to her like, "You're doing great."
No, no, I'm pretty quiet on the course, like, when I'm racing, like, so what I'm known for is, this happens every single race, and it's something that I love, is if I am racing, like, obviously around other people, specifically women, like, when we cross the line, I always go over to them right away and, like, pat them on the back, or, like, I'll try and make eye contact and say, like, "You did such a great job. Thanks for helping me out there," or whatever, and kind of have that like moment. Because if you're ever out there racing, especially in the last few miles of a race, or one girl at Indy, we kept like leapfrogging each other, and then eventually we were just like running next to each other, and it just helps so much. And oftentimes in the moment you don't express that, so I always like to express it after the fact, or if someone out kicks me, I'm like, great kick. Like, that was so great, or, whatever. And everyone's typically in a great, maybe not everyone, but like, you cross the finish line, you're just glad you're done.
Yeah.
Good vibes are flowing. So that's kind of a fun thing that I do after every race. But there is kind of that mental piece of, passing people, unfortunately, that kind of gives you that boost. to keep going. But I think the same is true when if you are looking at your watch for every split and you're looking down and you see the paces getting faster, or you feel, or you see the paces holding, but you still feel really good. I think that can also give you that mental boost of like, oh yeah, I'm doing this. This is exactly what, I wanted to do, or I'm getting stronger, I'm getting faster, something like that.
Yeah, I agree. Why I said that about the you're doing great is because sometimes that seems like when you're dying at the end of a race. Like there was one race, actually Fargo Marathon, I DNF'd. It was like the only race I've ever DNF'd because I'd already run a marathon like recently and I was just fried and I shouldn't have done it. But I was like walking on the course trying to find like where I could go to like get a ride to the finish line. So I was full on
Yeah.
walking, so tired, so just spent. And I had a few people passing me being like, "You're doing great." And I'm like,
You're like, I'm off the course.
"I'm not doing great. I don't need to have a pat on my back right now. I just need to know how to get the hell out of here."
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Where
I think that's funny.
Yeah, it's like, where do you know where the nearest bus is, please? Well, that's so tough. Do you mind sharing what mile you were at?
I think it was like 14. I wasn't even that like close to the end. I just knew I was going to do more harm than good at that point because my body hadn't,
Yeah.
recovered from the previous marathon. I just signed up because of peer pressure from friends and I just wasn't recovered and my body was like barely like going and I just was like I know I'm going to injure myself or just completely burn out for a long time if I keep going.
Yeah.
So I wasn't
That's
even
really hard to
sad
do.
about it. I was just like I know I'm making a good decision like just getting out of here, but it was just funny when you're like so tired that you can barely walk and somebody's like telling you you're doing such a good job. I'm like, no,
Yeah, which,
yeah.
kind of is my vibe, right? Like I am the cheerleader coach. I love to tell people good work, good job, nice job, all those things. But yeah, I think when I'm racing, I'm very I am pretty focused, and if I'm on the sidelines cheering, I try and say, some things that are a bit more neutral to kind of help that athlete, because I know how tough it can be.
Mhm.
No, when you're not feeling great and you're out there and someone says something like, someone's like, "Oh, you're so close to the end." You're like, "I have 10 miles." Like, I'm not close to the end.
Yeah, that's not.
This is not close. Yeah, I mean, a funny joke that happened in training between Jenna and I actually have used this on one athlete, and then I was like, never again, because it's not good if you're not in the right headspace. Is in long runs or workouts, I don't know, I would always like start to break down how much time we had left to laps on a track. And so Jenna and I had this really hard long run where it just ended up being like a hard day for us. We just weren't feeling great. We both weren't feeling poppy or anything. It was a 22-mile long run, and we had 16 miles at moderate pace, which is a little bit slower than marathon pace. And we went into this probably a bit too aggressive or too confident. And we thought, oh, slower than marathon pace. This is going to be great. Well, sometimes moderate pace doesn't feel good because it's a pace you haven't been practicing. It's a gray zone pace. It can just feel hard. And for us that day, it felt hard. And so um we talked about, I'm like, let's not bring headphones because we're gonna talk. And then like 3 miles into the moderate stuff, Jenna's like, so we're not talking. I'm like, should have brought headphones. Anyways, it was tough. Maybe like 6 miles into it, we had 10 miles left. Jenna's like, do you want to do the math on how many laps on the track we have
You're
left?
like, no.
And I'm like, no, no, I don't. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like that's just like a fun story of training, but like, it can be like that situation of, yeah, you don't want to say, I don't know. It's so tough to know what people
It's
respond to and
hard.
what people don't
Yeah,
respond to. Um, but it's all out there, and we're all out there for like, trying to do our best, encouraging others to do their best. And, I think the hardest thing in a race is continuing on when it's hard. And I think the other piece is like saying you have to stop when you know it's not going to bring you anything more, or it's going to hurt you, or like in your case for Fargo, you knew it wasn't the right move, so you had to stop.
yeah.
Yeah,
One
sometimes
thing
the
I was just
hardest.
thinking about, yeah, one thing I was just thinking about too is when you're um, executing your hydration and nutrition plan during
Yeah,
a marathon, especially. Another thing to think about is your kind of reverse progression run in my mind, because
yeah,
you have to make sure you don't miss those calories and that hydration early on, even though you
yeah,
might not be completely spent yet or completely like super thirsty yet. Because if you do, then later down the road, it's going to be too late. You're not going to have had enough calories along the way or enough hydration along the way. So think about
yeah.
that too as you're doing your progression run. Like really front load too. Make sure that you're hitting everything, because at the end, sometimes you can't stomach another goo, or like you're just getting to the end and you're like, I can't put another thing in my body.
Gel down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just
Yeah.
random. I thought about that as we were thinking through
Well,
racing.
it's a good tip, especially when we're talking about racing. I really like to I call it front loading. Like, let's front load your nutrition, your hydration in a way that we practice in training so that it doesn't upset the stomach and you start having GI issues, but it's something that we've practiced. And then, of course, if we've practiced it and it works well, it's going to give the athlete confidence and all that good stuff. And then before the race, I call it pre gaming. So, like, let's pre game for this marathon and have the hydration and all the fuel that we need going into it. But it is such a good strategy because you're right. Like, I remember at Indy, I missed a gel. I don't know if I've ever talked about that, but I definitely missed a gel and I'd gone like 5 miles without a gel. This was in the second half of the race. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I missed a gel. There were so many other things I was thinking about, which seems kind of wild. Jenna had and I had split up and I wasn't really sure where I was on the course because I had lapped my watch at the 5K, 10K mark, which don't do because it's going to mess you up. You're not going to know where you are on the course. And they didn't have signs. And I remember thinking, like, oh, I'm at mile 18 and I haven't had a gel since the halfway mark. Like, that's not good. Take a gel, take another gel. But eventually, at some point in the marathon, you're going to feel like you don't want to take another gel. So, how I
Mm.
like to combat that is by bringing something else to the course. And that could mean you're carrying it, or maybe you have a spectator or a family or friend on the side in the last 10K, and maybe they have a banana or some orange slices or a honey stinger waffle or just something different to eat that isn't a gel. And that'll go a long way too.
I like that idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean you have
Um,
friends that come and watch you? You have spectators that
no,
come
I
and cheer
usually
you
don't. I usually race solo and it's very lonely out there. Let's see. I had a friend come to the Boston Marathon the first time I ran it. And then, so she was with my sister. And fun fact about Boston, if you're running Boston, is they have, and Amber, you know this because you've been at Boston, they have barriers up. So you can't cross over the course. So they told me they were going to be on my right, runner right, and they were on runner left at about a mile difference too. So some of it was on them, some of it was on the course. And with Boston being so loud, I never heard them. They have videos of me running by them, like oblivious, but like
How long
I
did you
didn't see
look for
them.
them? You're like, okay, I just give up at some point,
I
right?
know,
Yeah.
I know. It's so tough. It's like you got to be where you're going to say you're going to be, but it's also really tough to make that happen too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think, going back to like strategies for achieving like the negative splits and the progression runs, we kind of talked about it throughout this entire episode, but it's really just running, making sure that you're practicing it in training, you feel confident about it, you're really relying on effort and you're staying patient early on in the run or the race. That's hands down always going to benefit the athlete. Yeah. And I think some common mistakes that we can talk about avoiding when you get into possibly training for or incorporating these into your training or racing is, making sure you're not starting out too fast, like we talked about. You're not increasing pace too abruptly. I think this is a huge thing that we kind of mentioned when we talked about that warm up and then going into the progression. You don't want to drop like 30 seconds right out of the gate unless it's like maybe easy to like like low zone 2 to high zone 2, that's probably okay. But going directly down to like half marathon effort can be jolting and it can just be really disruptive to the athlete. So just making sure that you're, increasing your pace slightly. It's not too abrupt because it is a progression and there's going to be more time and pace and energy outside of that first mile. And then, ignoring your RPE isn't a great idea either. So just making sure that you're getting that practice in, I think, is going to be tenfold to making sure that you can do this on race day.
Agreed. And I mean, you do need to become good friends with your Garmin if you're really wanting to, or whatever your brand of smartwatches,
Yeah.
really trying to make sure that you know how to use the technology and what works best for you, but also training your body so that your body knows how to respond and how to pick it up. Every once in a while in training, I've had a fun time where I've had a friend or my husband bike alongside of me or right in front of me, and pace me. And it's not
Nice.
super helpful for you to like, watch your watch and like know your splits and stuff, but it is super helpful every once in a while just to tune out and let your body just follow that person or be right alongside that person and not have to think about it. And then your body's still getting that progression. It's just that you're getting to have a little break of always looking at your watch and figuring it out. So that's good too because your body's still getting that practice. It's just probably not very often where somebody's going to volunteer to bike alongside of you, but it is nice.
I know, especially on a long run is like 3 hours of their morning. But I think that that's a really good point of if you have someone who does want to bike with you, because I know I have athletes, you have athletes, I'm sure, like who have spouses or friends who want to bike with them. I've only had one person ever bike with me on a long run, and that was Jenna last summer on a 20-mile easy. But I think it's really fun to have someone with you, and it kind of is the same. It has a lot of similarities to if you're running with others in a progression. And, if you think back to like if you're running on a track and you're all taking turns with the lead, that lead person does the work, right? And the other people, you just kind of hang on and it's a little bit easier. So if you have someone that you can run progression runs with, you can take turns on who's kind of working the pace and who's just running next to the person. Still an incredible amount of work, but it's less work. And if you can have a training or find a training partner like that or people to run with, it's going to go a long way in
Yeah.
so many different ways.
Yep. And your body's still getting that same practice.
Yeah, same stimulus, same training deposit, all the good things. Yeah. This was a great combo.
Yeah. I mean, now do you want to just go do a progression run?
I feel like it. I want to. We should get together and do one. I'll text you the next time I have something like that because I usually get progression tempos, which I really, really love. Like
Yeah.
starting out at half marathon or maybe marathon pace and then cutting down. It's so fun. And it's always fun with others too because it can be one of those situations where you just get lost in talking and it naturally happens like it can on easy runs with others.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the combo, Amber. You're so great. And for everyone listening, if you're looking to crush, a progression run, you're looking to negative split a race this year, maybe run your first marathon, catch that breakthrough or that Boston unicorn, the Elevate coaching team, which includes Amber, has one-on-one coaching spots open for spring and fall race season. So if you love running, and you want to get better and faster at this sport, stronger at this sport, we would love to have you join the team. And you can find more information about our coaching packages at elevateyourrunning.com/virtual coaching, or you can email me at Sara, SARA, at elevateyourrunning.com.
Yay.
Yay! Well, thanks
Yay.
everyone for listening this week. You're amazing. We love you so much. And we hope you have a great week.